Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy the
interview.
Today we are joined by one of the members from County Louth, Ruairi O Murchu. Ruairi, thank you for joining us today.
Well, here, it's good to be here. You know what I mean? I didn't have to go too far. That's the glorious of, I suppose, Zoom connections, isn't it? You know?
Exactly. I mean, I would have loved to go all the way to Dundalk and, joined you there in your, I guess, your little office there. But unfortunately, I don't have the money or the time at this point. So, great we were able to connect via Zoom and talk to you on this platform.
That's all right. You can't hear my dogs barking in the background, no?
No. Are they
That's
are
all
they
right. That's all right.
are they
Yeah,
going to make
yeah.
an
Well,
appearance on the podcast today, Ruairi, or?
no. Hopefully not, because they would outtrain me in every way, shape, and form. One of them's a Bichon Friesian, the other one's a half Bichon, half Shih Tzu. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they spend more time in the house than I do. You know.
They probably own the house at this point.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So just for our audience out there who may not know entirely a lot about you and probably about your constituency, County Louth, could you give us a little brief description of that just before we get into the questions?
Yeah, well, look, as I said, my name's Ruairi O Murchu. I'm a Sinn Fein TD for County Louth. Sinn Fein has been strong in this part of the world. So myself and Imelda Munster are the two Sinn Fein TDs out of five in County Louth. County Louth is right on the border. I'm from Dundalk. Dundalk is again incredibly close to the border, and Dundalk is halfway between Dublin and Belfast. You know, so look, it's got two in Irish terms relatively large towns, Dundalk and Drogheda. Obviously considerable amount of rural and smaller towns beyond that, but we would have our fair share of issues, whether you're talking about any of the issues that pertain to here, modern Ireland or the modern world as regards crime, drugs, etc. While like on some level, particularly Dundalk, like is thriving in relation to, foreign direct investment and whatever else. Not, but again, as I say, with multiple issues, if you're talking about the state at the minute, it's very hard to talk about it without saying there's a huge housing crisis, and that just means people have to pay if they're lucky enough to get a rental at just extraordinary amounts of money and very difficult to, buy a house very difficult, obviously, to put a deposit together unless you're literally staying in your mother and father's box room and whatever else. So that's an issue that has been, with me since a councillor and before, and it's just got worse and worse and worse, and it probably exacerbates some of the other issues that happen at the minute. You know what I mean? Because obviously, like anywhere else, you, all those other multiple issues, even in relation to organisation, the migration system, and whatever. The housing crisis is the one that always makes it worse. It's the one that, and in fairness, leads to an awful lot of people having anger in the sense of they see that this is a state that has a huge amount of money, and that huge amount of money they can't see it rectifying the problem of their kid who's still living in the box room. You know what I mean? Who may have a job where in previous times you'd be able to afford a house. That's why. And look here now. I know we're going to get beyond politics very quick. That's why Sinn Féin, even in the last while, which opposition parties, we're obviously not in government, an opposition party, we've come out in relation to our solution to the housing crisis. You know what I mean? And it's basically it's a huge policy platform about just ensuring that you've enough public houses in the sense of council houses, that you've enough affordable purchase, you've enough cost rental, as in rentals that don't absolutely kill you from an economic point of view, and just then ensure that you're stimulating enough in the private sector and hopefully taking the sting out of the market. So and without that, then obviously added protections for renters and others.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very similar issue to Australia as well. We've got a massive housing crisis here as well with I think Ireland and Australia kind of mirror each other in terms of, over the last 10, 15 years, we've had huge amounts of GDP growth and growth in our economies, especially. And I know with Ireland, there's been a huge influx of immigration over the past couple of years, and it's quite funny seeing as back in the day, Ireland was probably the country where everyone wanted to leave at that point, including my ancestors, my great great grandfather and his wife at that point. So it's quite funny now that a lot of people are coming back, are going to Ireland just with, I guess, with how much investment, how I guess good the economy is there nowadays. But as you
Yeah,
saying,
no, no,
there
look,
also
phenomenal. As I say, there were obviously, if you go through Irish history, huge periods of time when people were forced to leave due to, famine, political circumstances, British
exactly.
occupation. It's something we are still committed to ending. The problem with Ireland, even in relation to dealing with any of the issues, even some of the ones you're talking about, is the fact that it'd be a lot easier to deal with this on a 32 county basis, But that is something Sinn Fein have obviously been absolutely committed to, and that commitment has not waned in any way, shape, or form. But then you talk about even during my lifetime, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, that there was just even when I was growing up, you had this half notion that you could well be emigrating. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So therefore, we're in a very different place. But with that with those differences, there's obviously a need to manage things, and at times, we have had a failure of we've had a failure of vision and management at a governmental level. Now, I would say that, wouldn't I? You know what I mean? Obviously,
mm,
some of the people who are on would disagree with me, and hopefully, very soon we'll be able to put that to the electorate because we're facing into a general election. We're just not
exactly.
entirely
Yeah.
sure we could do it. Somebody like
Yeah.
literally calling or firing the shooting pistol.
And I've heard whispers.
Starting pistol. I think is.
I've heard as well. There's been some whispers that the election could be, in November. It could be in March. So
Yeah,
I think Cathal Bailey, who we interviewed a couple of weeks back, said 60% chance he thinks it's going to be in March, and 40% chance he thinks it's going to be in November. So it's all really
yeah.
up in the air. We don't really know at this point.
No, 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 no. We don't like people would think, yeah, that here it makes sense on some level, even from a governmental point of view, to just to go now. Nobody knows what happens, beyond November. And at that stage, they have budgets and everything done. And look, at that stage, I suppose there'll be a talk for here. People will say we need some element of, stability in the sense of what's happening into the future. You know what I mean? Any decisions to be made have to go to the people from a point of view of a government with a mandate to make those decisions. Now, I would have probably much preferred if, this would probably happen at an earlier stage, but that's it. We just need at this stage that they would call it whenever it's going to be, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. So, moving on now to our questions, Rui. My first question actually to you is, how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share?
I have a lot of moments I'd like not to share with anybody whatsoever.
Are they illegal or anything like that, Rui? I mean,
Definitely not. Politicians have lived an absolutely perfect life. You must know that. Right here, school. Look here. I had a really enjoyable, what we call secondary school. I went to the De La Salle in Dundalk. Actually, I grew up in a place called North Bridge, right? It's a couple of miles outside Dundalk. But I went to primary school in St. Joseph's, and then the then Irish stream and became Skullcrease 3, and then back to St. Joseph's. Now, my dad was the principal, which is the reason why I would have been there. And then, as I say, I went from there to the De La Salle. Probably in the early stages, I was a decent student. Towards the end, probably not so good. You know what I mean? And yeah, there's probably, a fair amount of extracurricular activities that, I got into that I could have done without. You know what I mean? Nothing too spectacular. Probably could have done, which is something that I would have discovered nearly later. Should have played a bit more sport than I did, you know. Probably didn't play and definitely didn't play enough organised Gaelic football. Played a bit of hurling, stopped it too early, and Louth wouldn't be a great county for hurling anyway. But there was a
who's
significant
Clare?
amount. No, well, here certainly wouldn't be as good as Clare. In fairness, someone would say there's only a very small number of counties that can actually play hurling on that sort of level, you know. Um, but look, it's a fabulous game. I'm sure anyone that's watched it, nothing actually compares to it. Yeah, and look, you would have always played soccer, even if it was only, whatever you call them, pick-up games, 5, 6, 7 aside, I would still do that today. Now you mightn't pay to watch me play. It's the only thing I would say, but it's very enjoyable. Yeah, look, and school. Well, look here, I managed to get the Leaving Cert. I went to to DCU afterwards, to do what was called computer applications, basically computer science. And again, not the greatest student of all time. Like I did go back at a later stage and do a master's, but that was as much to clean up what I had done as, or not done as a student, So what was the one? Yeah, at times I had, potential that I didn't always fulfill, but I met a lot of great people, met a lot of great friends, some who I would still be friends with today. You know what I mean? So I had an enjoyable time. I'm fairly sure during that whole period, my parents might not necessarily had the most enjoyable time. Um, you know, and yeah, it's like how far you go in relation to any of these things. Would have probably done what an awful lot of people would have done at one stage, probably as a kid, and uh, probably went out a bit too much at one point in time. Would have drank too much. It's fair to say. I actually, you know what I mean? When I was 17, I actually stopped drinking for a year. I'm not even talking about what brought that on. And then when I was 26, I decided I would quit alcohol for a month. And it's been the longest month in my life. You know what I mean? So 20 years on, that's it. So that was, as I said, someone asked me for what's your superpower? I said quitting. So I'm a really good quitter. And that was something I'm very glad I did.
In those sort of circumstances, in an island at that point, probably in the 70s and 80s, it still wasn't, economically probably the best place. So there was a lot of hardship, I guess, with a lot of younger people, especially people like yourself, Rui, at that point in time.
Oh, no. Like, see, in fairness, no, I grew up in very much a middle class home. Like, as I say, my father was a principal. We always had plenty now. Plenty probably is different in relation to what it means today. You know what I mean? And you even compare, how you're brought up versus your kids, and there's almost an element of, you probably spoil them more than you were spoiled, but no, so yeah, I'm not saying throughout the period of my life, I was born in 1978. Yeah, there would have been a huge amount of people who would have gone through a hell of a lot more hardship than I would. And obviously, we were close to the border. You're talking about a period of time when the conflict was ongoing. You would have had a considerable amount of people who would have moved to this part of the world as well from the north. So you would have become aware of that set of circumstances. And obviously, if I talk about Sinn Fein, I would associate it obviously with the Republican struggle. It's something I would have had an affinity with in the sense of I wanted to see a United Ireland. I had a particular difficulty with British soldiers being on Irish soil, but the Republican movement and Republican leaders like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness and others played a huge role alongside others. You know what I mean? In the political domain, everywhere from America across Ireland and into Britain to create, I suppose, a better set of circumstances. And from our point of view, we see it as a set of circumstances where we can deliver a United Ireland and we can deliver Irish freedom through peaceful and democratic ways. And I'm very glad that, that the conflict is over, because obviously conflict does nothing but, produce a huge amount of
Right.
pain and anguish to people. That's what happens with it. Now, it was an absolute failure of politics in Britain and Ireland, I would say, that led to that. But as I say, we're very glad that has changed. And I would have always seen that the Republican leaders played a huge role in relation to delivering the peace process. So what I would have seen from Republicans, what I would have seen from Sinn Féin members here was an involvement in a liberation struggle. I would have seen an involvement in putting a peace process together and moving things on in this island. And then even beyond that, I would have seen the work that they would have done locally and in an awful lot of cases with, communities that the establishment had generally forgot about or didn't care that much about.
As well, even people from the non-Republican Irish side would have been really glad that the conflict at that point really ended at that point, just because the amount of torment and the amount of anguish it created, and the separation and the death of a lot of innocent people, which is quite sad. So, yeah, at the end of the day,
the deaths of anyone, because look, whatever your view is in relation to it, it has a huge impact on a family and a wider community and all the rest
exactly.
of it. And you never know what the outworkings of that happen. The ripple effect can be absolutely huge.
Exactly. Families are torn apart. the loss of any brother, sister, father, daughter, uncle, aunt to that point is really destructive and can really destroy the family unit at that point. So it is really important now that Ireland's moved on from that point, and even if there is still, I guess, still a pro British sense and a pro Irish Republican sense, they're able to come together and try and fight for both sides in a democratic and peaceful way.
Well, look, you've a better circumstances in the north, and obviously it's huge from our point of view that Michelle O'Neill is in there as first minister. But it's not just as that; that's a win for Sinn Féin. It's an attempt to be a first minister for all. I suppose it's that idea of because the when we talk about, like, let's say, Republican goals and objectives, what they're meant to be, what we want them to be, is that we produce something on this island that is better than what existed before for all the people on the island. So, at the minute, well, you are working through the executive and the assembly from a point of view of bettering people's lives, while at the
Exactly.
same time trying to maintain good relationships. Obviously, engagement with the Dublin government is vital. Can
Mm,
that be improved? Definitely. Have there been certain things that have been done in the last while which are better? Yes, but could it all be done on a much greater level? 100%. And then beyond that, you need, decent relationships east and west, but with obviously Britain and the British government. And you probably have a British government you might be able to deal with now more so than you could have during the period of Boris Johnson and others and the
mm,
Conservative Party that was, to put it mildly, slightly out of control.
mm. Totally agree with you there, Rory. So
Reminded us of British governments that we've dealt with over centuries, in relation to arrogance and bad decisions that they made for both themselves and not caring about anybody that lived on this island.
mm. So moving on to our next question, then, taking a more, I guess, moving away, I guess, from politics in a sense. So outside of
I'm told
Parliament, Rory,
I'm told I tend to tangent, so you probably need to control me. You know what I mean? Otherwise, I
I'll
can
try my best, Rory. I'll try my best. So outside of Parliament, you enjoy playing sports, including, as we were saying before, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, kickboxing, and running. How important is physical health to a TA and to the people of Ireland? I know I said MP there, but I do remember that you guys are TDs.
That's the dollar. Look, in fairness, I think it's vital for everyone, and whatever that exercise is, if it's walking or whatever you can do, and then, sometimes we can be time poor, but you can always make, even from a personal point of view, you make bad decisions sometimes in relation to how you spend that little free time that you have. Look, I I would have run an awful lot. Like at one stage, yeah, in latter years, I would have boxed, I would have kickboxed, and I would have done a considerable amount of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Now, I have little enough brain cells as there are, so I wouldn't. Boxing is not something I've kept up, and boxing's always a sport I thought is not one for messing around at, really. Particularly if you're going to spar in any way, shape, or form and get in the ring. Yeah, no, I haven't kickboxed in a number of years. I'm not sure I could, like, how high I could get my foot at the minute. But jiu-jitsu is the one that I would train here with Team Torres. Now, they probably wouldn't be too happy in relation to the amount of time that I train. And I would have always, over the years, in all of them, I would have competed a fair bit. I suppose that was an element of my midlife crisis. Someone said it was a lot cheaper than a Ferrari. Um, I think it's very important. I think it's very important from a politician to see how useful it is in relation to connectivity of the involvement in teams. And as I say, I would still play a bit of. I would still play soccer with a number of guys. You know what I mean? And on an AstroTurf
I'm guessing you're a
pitch.
big Dundalk fan with the jumper you've got on there.
Yeah, well, this has been a very strange week for Dundalk. We were facing the possibility of absolutely of on Monday that the club could have been going into liquidation and basically out of existence. So there has been an
Mm,
ownership change in the last number of days, and I to say we're at the beginning of a journey, to probably put ourselves back into a decent place. And look, the fact is Dundalk are playing Sligo tonight, so hopefully we think we can. We'll have a turnaround in form on the field, but we really need to make sure that, I suppose, the building blocks are put in place, that Dundalk is doing what it needs to do in the community, doing what it needs to do off the field from an ownership management point of view, and then beyond that, make sure it can actually do business on the field. But I would think there's a number of major steps to go. But as regards how the beginning of the week started, this has been a good week in the sense we are still in existence. And
Mm.
look, Dundalk has had a magnificent legacy, you know, and I think had Dundalk gone, it would have been disastrous, not only for the league this year, would have turned the results on their heads, you know, in the sense of that anyone who played Dundalk, all those games would have been negated, and the
Mm.
entire integrity of the league would have been drawn into question. So there's again a number of protocols probably need to be looked at to make sure no club ends up in that circumstance again, as much as you can ever do in this, you know. So what I'm
Dundalk
saying is, it's a reasonable end to what was a bad week, you know.
week. And I know from looking at the past history of Dundalk, in recent times as well, they've been extremely probably one of the best teams in the whole of the Irish Premier League at that point. So it is quite sad to see Dundalk at a low point, but I'm sure as with your optimism, Rui, they'll be able to pick themselves up again and be champions once again.
Yeah, no, look, well, you saw a whole pile of goodwill, a whole pile of buy-in, and that buy-in was from all the fans. You know what I mean? And a huge amount of people from people who were willing to. The supporters club had looked for money, and you know a number of people put money into that. But what you also had is you had promises of if it was a doomsday scenario of
Mm.
another of people who had resources who are willing to put their money where their mouth was to save the club. So and hopefully all that can be garnered into the future. You know, to produce something that you know which is what Dundalk wants and needs. You know.
Exactly, 100% agree with
Anyway,
you.
but what I was going to say in relation to politicians, it's the fact of not only is it good for yourself, you know, healthy body, healthy mind, and all that. It's very good for clearing the head and sometimes some of the nonsense and some of the serious stuff that you deal with as a politician. And running is one of those easy ones because you know you don't have to go training. You literally put a pair of runners on, and generally, if you have the outside of that a pair of shorts and a running watch, you know, and
Mm.
you're running against yourself, you'll always be able to pick up, as I say, a park run, whether it's the park run that I hopefully will get back then over the next couple of weeks, you know, in Dundalk or wherever else. Um, but it's also good to know just the importance of this from a health point of view across the board, from kids right on, and to try and if you can instill, you know, a notion of fitness in a world where we have that many pushes and pulls to lead a sedentary lifestyle, you know, and
Mm.
see where kids used to be outside, and even if they weren't involved in organized sport, and even myself at times, you were always playing football if that was just putting a couple of, I mean, soccer, like if you were putting a couple of jumpers down to mark out goals, you know, kids don't do that as much. They spend an awful lot of time on, you know, PlayStations and whatever else,
On your
and
phone, social media.
that's it. And look, and in fairness, see if you even went back to a period of time when I was growing up, you probably didn't have the prevalence of what would you call it, you know, of certain foods and sweets and whatever else. As much as there was always, you know, I mean, there was
Mm.
always stuff you shouldn't do, but there wasn't the amount of it. You know what I mean? So people were just naturally healthier. They, you know, they weren't living the same sort of sedentary lifestyle. I remember looking at a picture. It was my sixth birthday party or something, but it wasn't even. You had the kids and then you had the adults, and everybody was kind of fit and thin and whatever else. That wouldn't be the case these days. So look, there's obviously, and again, you know, it's not the nanny states type scenario, but I think the state has to having you know a greater level of intervention to try and facilitate more people to be involved in sport and you know to be healthy and
Mm.
we've seen huge see with all the issues there are, and there are issues here in relation to how the health system has worked, you know, and anyone who's been in an accident and emergency won't be particularly impressed in the last while, you know.
Mm.
But what you need to make sure is see if we can get people to live healthier lifestyles. Even we can get people on a percentage basis, you're reducing the amount of people who will need to be in hospitals at certain times, even if people live
Exactly.
longer. As I said, the benefits of medicine mean we are living longer. It would be better that we were living longer and healthier. And even from an accounting point of view, that would mean the cost to the exchequer would be a lot less in relation to your medical interventions. You know,
Exactly.
I'm not saying it's perfect, but you've seen it yourself. Where to talk about if you engage in what is it, 20 minutes of training on a you know daily basis or a number of times a day, like it drastically reduces the amount of risks that you have
Mm.
from a health point of view. You know, whatever about, you know, we've all seen the spectacular results that people have got at Olympic level and
Exactly.
whatever else, like our Paralympic, like we have obviously Kate O'Connor and Eve McChrystal are two in this particular part of the world that have brought us a huge amount of joy and happiness through a huge amount of their efforts, exertion, and whatever else, and hopefully people see that sort of stuff and it drives them on to do different. And the other thing I would say in sport, and something I became very involved with this year, was Loud Disability Cycling Club. And that was the idea of facilitating, whether you're talking about kids with autism, whether you're talking about citizens with people with Down syndrome, or mobility issues and all the rest of it. And you have like these mobility bikes and whatever else, and you have also a coming together of people in something that's really healthy, and provides a connection for families and whatever. Because again, disability issues would be an issue that I would engage in quite a lot. My son's autistic, and so that would it means I've skin in the game outside of anything else. But you would often talk to parents about, let's say, the resources and the therapies and the assessments that they can't get. But this is something that you can get, and it gives you connection to other families that also provides you with sometimes with that information, the stuff that they have learned, how they have got through life. So, I suppose I should put a shout out to, the chair, which is Gary Shields, and then Paul Callan in particular, who wouldn't let you just, as I say, I'm not quite sure whether I volunteered or he volunteered me, you know what I mean? But it's really, really positive stuff.
Exactly. And those sort of initiatives, especially within your local community, are really, really crucial to be a part of. And as you're saying with your autistic son, hearing those different experiences from parents of who have already gone through that sort of scenarios, as you are probably about to, Rui. How old is your son actually, Rui? Is he quite young still, or?
Yeah, like he's in his third year. He's 15. He will be 16 in December.
Okay.
Turlock's his name. Like if I didn't name him, you know what I mean?
Exactly. So, like, especially for your
And
son,
look, and in fairness, he's in a school of fee. It's been absolutely brilliant. And in fairness, they would have stated on some level it was a learning experience for them, you know. But uh, I can only say good things, you know.
Exactly, exactly. And being a part and hearing those sort of different experiences is so crucial because from my experience, from what I've seen, so I have a peanut allergy, I have a nut allergy. So, going to the hospital and that sort of thing, and then you see a lot of young mums and they'll come up to you and they'll ask questions from you because you've been through that experience, being an 18-year-old and having a young mum come up to you who's got a newborn child and who's developing a nut allergy. And hearing those sort of different experiences from where I've come from and what I've experienced for them is really, really crucial. And it really helps you
Of course it
understand
is.
a bit more about the issue. And, it really helps you, it helps those sort of issues become more clearer and easier to understand.
No, 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 definitely. And it's like I said, because sometimes what people say when they're talking, even to politicians, why is there not a one-stop shop I can go to? But in cases, and that is the sort of resources that we as politicians need to put a framework in place and have to deliver. But outside of that, if you get talking to somebody who has life experience and who even hit many closed doors and then managed to get them open, and they say, here's how I did it, here's how you can do it, here's what is available, here's what worked, see that thing that you're very worried about. No need to worry as much about that, but here is something that you need to get on top of. You know,
Exactly.
um, yeah, no, no, no. Of course, it's absolutely brilliant. Now, again, and I told you the danger of asking me any question is that I will tangent on my tangent.
It's all good. It's all good, Roy. And we're up to our next question. So I believe I have it here. So hang on. Yeah. So additionally, you were a member of the Louth County Council, and also a chairperson of the Louth Drug and Alcohol Forum, and a member of the Northeast Drugs Task Force. So how did these roles within your local community help you in your run for Parliament, and what sort of skills did you learn and implement that you were able to currently use in Parliament?
See, in fairness, how do I put it? There's an element of there were particular bodies that I wanted to get on because I went in with an interest in this particular field. I was co-opted into county council position September 18, 2017, Now, I would have, before that, I would have worked for Sinn Fein for many years, you know what I mean? So I would have been involved in the election department. And even back in 2011, I would have worked for a period in Leinster House. And before that, I would have worked as an organizer, you know what I mean, particularly throughout North Leinster, you know? So, and I would have always been involved in certain things locally and whatever else. And look, you could see that you had a huge issue in relation to drugs. I even remember, even just when I went in as a councillor, I remember just dealing with a particular issue. And we were literally sitting and waiting on somebody to land on and seeing the house next door. You could suddenly see the guys arriving with the push bikes at the time, it's regular, you know, bicycles, taking whatever and then moving to wherever they were throughout the estate and further afield. And you could just see this sort of normalized behavior every which way, you know what I mean, that wouldn't have existed even 10, 15 years before that, you know. And you could see how it was impacting, you know, in relation to antisocial behavior, in relation to, you know, burglaries, in relation to, you know, just families where there may have been issues where it just became far more chaotic because you suddenly had a huge level, you had a drug problem thrown in on top of it, and then you could end up with multi-generational addiction and what have you. So in fairness, what you saw if you're talking about the Northeast Drugs and Alcohol Task Force was the fact that you had an entity which was, you know, meant to connect with local, let's say, structures in relation to dealing with addiction and whatever else. But this would have been a body where the funding was absolutely cut. You know what I mean? Going back to 2008, 2009, 2011. And the problem is that it never really got back on its feet. So you probably had what was a skeleton structure that remained. And you were suddenly in a different place in the sense of, you know, Ireland has an even bigger level in relation to those that are using benzos, those that are using cocaine, you know, pick any drug, pick anything. It is a million times worse than it was. See, the issues that I was dealing with as a councillor in relation to drug debt intimidation, where somebody's granny or parents or grandfather was getting the rap on the door in relation to somebody's drug debt, and you know the usual, these jumped and jumped and jumped. So look, it's an issue that I had here with myself and others, you know, within Sinn Féin, but particularly when I was an elected rep, you engaged a huge amount with the guards. Sometimes I said I was dealing with the guards more than I was dealing with, you know, council officials. You also dealt with council officials. See, to this day, I'm dealing with council officials and around sometimes where you're dealing with issues of drug dealing out of council houses, you know, issues like that. And I will also say, see, when you're talking about the guards, you're talking about TUSLA, you know what I mean, which is, you know, Child Protective Services. You're dealing with the local authority, as I say, Louth County Council. You're dealing with a whole pile of entities that don't have the power to deal with the issues that are in front of them. Well, you know what I mean? And people can get away with an awful lot of what is incredibly bad behavior, but worse than bad behavior. And you have some chaotic scenarios where people, and they're vulnerable people themselves, but they're used to sell, you know, the party houses, and they create huge impact on the wider community. And you don't necessarily always have, as I say, whether you're talking about the local authority, whether you're talking about the guards, whether you're talking about whether you're talking about, as I say, even TUSLA, the tools and the resources that you would need to combat the problems we're dealing with at the minute. So that's something I would highlight. Even in the last week, you now have basically this. You had citizens assembly in relation to, you know, drug use, drug crime, all that, and you now have a committee in the Oireachtas, in the Parliament, and I'm not a member of it, but I intend to try and make as many of those meetings as possible. So I will be there. I was there dealing with, it was GPs, general practitioners, doctors, and pharmacists. You know, and this is the whole idea around decriminalisation and whatever else. But you know, we need to do something novel because what we've done to date hasn't worked. The problem has got a lot worse. But it's exactly the two ends. It's how you provide those addiction services, how you provide the backup services, how you facilitate to get people out of that. But you also have to deal with the criminal element, and unfortunately, the normalised criminal element that you see, particularly in the private working class areas, where people can quite easily see, well, I know how I can make money. I can do what that guy's doing. because he's got a big house and he's got a big car and he's got whatever else, and nobody seems to be able to touch him. Now, from time to time, you see there are operations. You've seen a huge level of drugs being caught, you know what I mean, within their millions. You've seen huge operations even locally. You've seen the Criminal Assets Bureau taking houses off people. You've seen all of that, and you've seen people put away. But sometimes, by the time, let's say, something gets to court, if it's serious enough crime, the person may have been away in remand for something else. You're talking 2, 3, 4 years. See, the drug dealers, those that are now involved in drug dealing, they didn't necessarily know who this guy was. So it isn't a disincentive for them. You know what I mean? So, look, it's a huge issue. Of course, it was worthwhile in the sense you could highlight issues, you could deal with the organisations that are operating at the coal face, and it's something I try and maintain. You know what I mean? I was only at a conference there the other day by the Family Addiction Support Network, and they would talk about, this was in Carrickdale, which is just outside Dundalk, and it's that idea that they would say that there aren't the supports, you know what I mean, for the wider family and all the rest of it, and that, you know what I mean, and that political parties and the government in particular have not addressed this to any way, shape, or form. So that's a particular issue we have to push. So it's looking at the problem, dealing with the reality of it, because I think just saying no hasn't exactly worked. The war on drugs hasn't exactly worked, but you have to try and facilitate that you can remove people from the criminal sphere, that you can remove them from drug taking, that you can avoid some of them getting into it. And that's the bit we've absolutely failed on. And that's something I really believe in. And that's early intervention family support. Some of these projects we even did before, but then what happens is you pull resources from it, or you leave them with the same resources and you give them a bigger area to deal with. And it just ends up meaning, it doesn't have the impact as it could have. And here, people will say, oh, see, if you don't spend this money, you end up spending a lot more when you're dealing with the criminal justice system and whatever else.
Exactly.
And look, it's imperfect. And like, if someone says, like, see, the plan to out-police this would be something that people wouldn't countenance. You know what I mean? Because you cannot continue, with normal democratic policing, you cannot deal with the situation that's out there. So you have to tackle it at every angle. But it is not okay to leave open drug dealing in places where it becomes absolutely normal for kids, where kids live sometimes in very small areas where, to a degree, it's everywhere. I think the example someone said to me is, if you sit in a barber chair for long enough, you get a haircut. So we need to make things better, and we need to intervene, particularly with those families that may be more susceptible to kids falling into it. And then it's about breaking poverty and those wider issues also, and it's making sure you provide people with a decent roadmap. And this has been done in some cases, so some of it's just putting it all together, a decent roadmap into education and beyond that into employment, because that's where you really break all of this,
Exactly. And it's an issue that we have here as well with a lot of people. It's an issue
worldwide.
Yeah. Yes, and exactly, there's a lot of kids who grew up in pretty deprived, pretty poor areas, especially a lot of Indigenous kids in Australia. I don't know how much you know about Aboriginal Australians, but a lot of them disproportionately, are in the jail system and that sort of thing. And it really goes back to the fact that they grew up in that sort of environment, and that early intervention just isn't key. It just doesn't happen, and it's so crucial, to better their lives and to be able to for them to make more.
No. It's poverty. Now, the other thing I would say is, the reason so much money is in it isn't because, because sometimes people think the problem is the addicts that they see, and sometimes you can see it outside courthouses, and it's an unfortunate term where people see, almost a group of people who are like zombies. But the problem is, on Friday, Saturday night in Dundalk or any other place around Ireland and beyond, you're going to have a huge amount of people who are working, have decent enough jobs, are ostensibly middle class, who are going to take cocaine. And they're going to put money into the hands of drug dealers. And, you're talking about these, and they will put money into the same guys who will not care how many people are wiped, and will not care about what price they have to pay to stay in business and to stay in, I was going to say in lavish lifestyles. Obviously, lower down, they're not exactly lavish lifestyles, you know what I mean? It's and you end up with people in an absolutely chaotic place. But I think sometimes people think it's harmless what they do. They think the problem is heroin. They think the problem is the heroin user or the guy who might use crack and fentanyl,
Exactly.
whereas they're only using cocaine. But they are putting money into this industry and into this problem, and that is something that they need to take a personal responsibility with. But it's something across the board that we all need to address. And here, for some of them, they will end up in a bad set of circumstances, and whether that's health wise or whether that's running up in debt because they lose control, no more than a lot of people in Ireland and everywhere else can't handle alcohol. Some of them aren't going to be able to handle cocaine, and they will end up with a rap on the door to themselves or somebody within their family. And sometimes what happens is worse. Now, I would always say to people in those positions, they should talk to the guards, they should talk to the likes of myself or somebody else. And you're in a bad case. I remember it was a chief superintendent, a former chief superintendent said the problem is if the drug dealer knows that the tap is open in relation to money, they will always come back.
Exactly. 100% agree with you, Rui. And I guess this moves on. This relates to our next question as well. So as I said, with the upcoming election in Ireland coming up, what are some of the important initiatives in Louth that you would like to push and bring forward to Parliament after the next election if you are elected?
Well, there's a number of things. Obviously, the issue that we've just spoken about, you know what I mean? We need to get to terms with something that'll work. And it's an across the board scenario, and it's everything from family interventions right through to the policing piece that needs to be done. And it is making use of best practice that you've seen and those bits of best practice that work. But, you know, even in relation to dealing with yesterday, the whole idea was, yeah, no, look, they were supporters of decriminalization of, you know, let's say the addict and user. And here, with the caveat that you always make sure that there are protections, that drug dealers don't just use this as a means of, you know, getting around the law. Um, but they said what you also need to happen in parallel is that you actually provide the framework and the support infrastructure around addiction services and all the rest of it. Or because sometimes people think one thing is a silver bullet and none of it is. You have to do all of this. It's cross departmental, and I don't think we've been serious enough. I think the fact that you have a junior minister that has responsibility for this and they don't sit at cabinet means it doesn't have the same importance that other issues have. And, you know, it would also fit into that thing that I would say that some of these parties, and even though they may have people within them that, you know, have an interest in this issue, but they, as a collective, that they don't see the importance and the impact that this has, particularly in working class areas, you know, and communities that they probably have not, that I would say they haven't paid as much attention to. So that's something that we need to do. I've already spoken in relation to, you know, disability issues. I think actually that the idea of that Loud Disability Cycling Club, that's an idea that can be moved across Ireland. But beyond that, we really need to, when I'm talking about the resources that people can't get, the assessments, the therapies, and all the rest of it. And we know that there's pieces of work being done in relation to increasing the numbers of people who can do that, but that'll take time. But I think what there has been a failure to do is to talk to all the stakeholders and say, what can we offer now? What's the best service we can offer? Where's the best place we can offer? Sometimes Ireland's a great place for pilot projects. So you hear about the school inclusion model, whereas where in the school setting you would put your therapists and if it was your psychologists and whatever, and whether that's a special school or you know what I mean, or a regular school, it means that you can just benefit a lot more people. It also means you're putting the service where the issue is, where the need is. And then beyond that, it means the teachers, the special needs assistants, and all those others can pick up on what the best practice were and implement it. And you can also have the follow on with parents as a, you know, and then you will still have the more severe cases where you will need bespoke medical attention. And then you do that. And I just wish we could get to that point quicker. So I would like to see an element of streamlining. And also it means using assistive technologies because you know yourself, you could be shown the best thing you need to do in relation to you and your kid. But see if that thing is on a phone and you can refer to it and they can refer to it and deal with it daily, then you're in a different place. You know, it's like it's providing the therapy and it's providing, you know, a steroid shot alongside it, for the want of a better term.
Exactly. 100% agree there. So those are really some of the.
No,
Yep,
no,
as you
they
said.
are. Because sometimes you see if we're talking to our idea of getting in government as well. We spoke about the housing crisis. It's about delivering a solution to the housing
Exactly.
crisis. about delivering a solution to what is the health crisis and the fact that we haven't invested sufficiently in community, that a huge amount of people are still going through A&E, that you still have backlogs there, and you have a huge amount of other issues in relation to it. I could deal with, very specific issues that relates to orthodontic treatment or whatever else. It doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? We need to get a handle on the big issues, and then we need to deal on these, smaller issues that are huge issues for individuals, and look, if you're talking about disability, you can't talk about disability without talking about school places. I have proposed that, you know what I mean, parents would be able to look at getting a child with disabilities admitted into school 2 years beforehand. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
the school could have everything in place, as opposed to what
Exactly.
happens with where you apply, a year out, and then we have the whole situation where people aren't sure whether they can get into school, so that
Mm.
there are no shortage of issues, but also I deal with schools where they say, here, we had a school building program that said we were to be provided something in September of this year, and it looks like we mightn't even get it for September of next year. Is there any
Yeah.
chance, you know what I mean, that you could intervene and make sure that we get contacted by an official in relation to delivering this? And these are the sort of things that really annoy people and rightfully annoy them, and we need to get fixed. So, you know what I mean? Obviously, we're a Republican Party. It's about delivering on Irish unity. So it's a matter of an Irish government that would put more emphasis in relation to dealing with the British government around the possibility of a referendum. And then, you know what I mean, when we have that referendum in play and a decent run in time, and then that the Irish government would put a decent effort into making sure that we have the research pieces and all done. Now, there is a shared island unit that created. I think it was a good idea. Some pieces of this work were done, but a lot more needs to be done. And it's also engaged in, necessary projects. The narrow water bridge is one of them. Again, we have huge issues, obviously, with, the previous British government, and we're hoping this British government can deal with, issues in relation to legacy and families who are still looking for truth and justice, and all that. So we believe we can impact greatly. We also need to get a handle and deal with other partners on an international basis in relation to if you're dealing with migration. And look, straightforward, you say, first of all, you need to address the questions of why so many people are leaving, huge tracts of Africa and the Middle East. I think the Western world has its part to play there, alongside the Russians and Chinese and whoever else. But we also need to make sure we have our own house in order in relation to our own rules, regs, that we have the supports as regards processing and whatever else that needs to be done. I think these are all sensible things that should have been done a long time ago. And even those pieces that the government has done in latter years, a lot of it's very late. And, unfortunately, you have a government which has always really relied on the private sector. So sometimes when you have a mess and a scenario like that, there's a huge amount of people who will end up making a lot of money, if that is housing people who are seeking international protection and whatever else. And some of them do it in places that aren't necessarily up to standard and whatever else, and create issues themselves. So these are all, and again, you can only do this when you engage with a community, and you know what I mean, you're getting a community buy-in while accepting there's a huge amount of people who have problems around this that you'll never keep happy, and I think with Ireland, we're like everywhere else. You cannot operate in the world without migration. There always has been migration. Our health service couldn't operate without the people that come from abroad to work in it. Now, that's not to say we also have to improve the circumstances and situation. And as much as young Irish people, some of them may always want to go to places like Australia and whatever. We need them to think that there's a life here, that they don't have to leave straight away, that they can work in a decent job, that they can save money, and that they can get a house and a home.
Exactly. 100% agree with you there, Rory. So there is a long list of, problems, and I guess, with with Sinn Féin's manifesto, I think that's come out in the last couple of days. That those sort of solutions hopefully can be fixed in the short term or in the long term.
Look, it'll be our first of all, I suppose we're looking at is it's manifesto, and then we're in budget season, so with the entire pre-budget submission, which is, and again, not always as easy to do from opposition, because you don't necessarily have all the information that a government has.
Mm.
But We have obviously put out our housing plan. We're going to be putting out our health plan. We've put out, let's say, our plan in relation to mental health services. We just need to put it all together. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And we need to put it in front of the people. Obviously, all fully costed and whatever else, and they need to see what they would prefer. And look, we've seen in the last while the Apple tax money, where the Irish state fought not to take taxes that the European Commission believes should have been paid in Ireland. So you have, somewhere of up to 14 billion that is now coming back into the Irish exchequer. And I suppose a determination needs to be made in relation to how we use this money and use it wisely and make sure that it has an impact.
mm,
And the unfortunate thing is this was monies that could have been provided at a time when we were going through austerity during the banking crisis. I could say when a Fianna Fáil government crashed the economy. And obviously there was a huge pain across the board, you know what I mean, for what they introduced and then later what the Fine Gael led government did after that, you know. And like we spoke about some of the services and whatever that had been cut previously and in previous times, some of that happened at that stage. And that money obviously would have made a huge impact. So we have literally talked about that 1 billion of it straight away should be put away for like it's like a community fund that would be used particularly in those hard pressed areas, which would have felt those years of austerity the most, which would have felt, where you cut back on all those community supports and whatever else. Yeah, look, there's no shortage of issues. And I suppose what we need to do is put our ideas to the people. The people will provide a mandate for the next government, and then it's a matter of delivering. And we would like to be in a position to do that. And we will do our absolute best to bring that circumstance about.
mm, mm, Interesting there, Rory. So then moving on to our next question. I know we've spoken a lot about policies there, but um, I do have a bit of an idea of who I think you'd say for this answer here. But who would you say is your political role model and or idol? And I'm going to assume it might be the person that you replaced in Parliament.
No, no, it undoubtedly is. You know what I mean? Look, Jerry Adams. It was an absolute, obviously, privilege to be able to work alongside Jerry Adams, whether that was in Sinn Fein, whether that was as a councillor, and then obviously to replace him as TD, yeah, was a spectacular privilege. No, look, Jerry Adams, I think I'd stated was a giant of Republican politics. Um, Jerry, when the rest of us are well forgotten about the history books, will remember Jerry Adams, and I remember that being put to him when he was kind of standing loud. Why are you doing this? And being put to him probably by commentators who didn't necessarily, I would have said were supportive of us, but that he fell into that field. Look, he became involved in the Republican struggle from a very early stage, and look, in fairness, Jerry Allen's probably very lucky to have lived through a considerable amount of it. You know what I mean? Was shot, but never wavered and never steered away from it, and then played an absolutely huge pivotal role in relation to delivering the peace process. But you look at his involvement in relation to that period during the hunger strikes and whatever else, and the huge pressure that he would have been under, and obviously he was talking to people that you know, were not only Republican comrades, but some of them would have been, friends of his. Um, so, and look, he obviously had great strategic capacity. And so, therefore, yeah, no, without doubt, uh, an absolute privilege from my own point of view to see him up close and personal. But yeah, no, I would put him obviously as a major icon. It goes without saying, you would put Martin McGuinness in the same bracket. Um, and I suppose beyond that, you're talking about obviously, you know, others such as Nelson Mandela, who
Mm,
were, who went through great personal hardship, but went on to deliver. You know what I mean? To deliver on the possibility of a future for the people of South Africa. We would obviously like to see, and again, something that I didn't highlight. I like Sinn Fein has always been, and the Republican movement has always been internationalist. We would have been involved with South African anti-apartheid movement. We would have been involved in relation to, the involvement and would still support whether we're talking about Catalonia or the Basques. And we would have always had a huge affinity in relation to Palestine. And it goes without saying that you have to make mention of the fact of there being an abject failure of the Western world to hold Israel to account, and that's particularly America. And we have attempted to use whatever relationships we have had in America, which have been huge and still will be huge. Were huge in relation to delivering the peace process, but unfortunately need to move themselves into a different place. And we just hope that this can be done before it's too late. Now, and it's also the fact that you're dealing with a genocidal regime, which is very different even from those regimes that have existed in Israel from 1948, with all that was done wrong onto the Palestinians. But what we're dealing with is something very, very much different, and we need the Western world to step up, and we will add our voice and do whatever we can in relation to that. We would say that we have pushed the Irish government, that the Irish government have made a number of stands, that there are definitely further moves that need to be made. And if we can do them on a European level, that's brilliant. But see, where we can't, we need to introduce the Occupied Territories Bill, where, there can be no trading with any state, with no trading with any company that is involved in the illegal settlements. And we need to make sure that we have the divestment bill we spoke about again, where no Irish state monies could be involved in any company that has any involvement in relation to this. And this is a matter of, I suppose, it's the first steps. If you look at South Africa and you saw that a major part of it was the boycott on an international level, and it was the fact that regular white South Africans saw themselves as, or felt like they were pariahs. So they wanted to move out of that place. So alongside all the other aspects of the South African struggle, that worked. So that's something that's absolutely vital from our point of view. Now, I've definitely tangented in relation to what the question was.
No problem at all, Rui. And I was going to say as well, I'm guessing you guys are very much involved in, the Australian Republican movement, the Canadian Republican movement, and I guess a lot of the Commonwealth nations as well.
Yeah, look, and look, you obviously would have had the conversation around obviously Scotland and Scottish independence. Now, on some level, you would also say it is up to those people, you know what I mean, and to make their own decisions themselves and all the rest of it. And we in Ireland don't get to make decisions. No more than I would have said, as much as I thought Brexit was a terrible idea for a British government, but it was, their right to do. My issue was the impact it would have on Ireland. My issue was even in the northern state that I would say is an artificially created state, but the majority of people within it voted to stay within the European Union. You know what I mean? But the fact is that's the nature of the entity that they are in at the minute. And for all the successes there may be in the assembly and institutions in the north, the power lies in Westminster, and that's something that we have to change, and we have to move the situation on until we can bring about a united Ireland. Yeah, look, and historically, because again, I suppose this question started from a point of view of who your icons were. As a kid growing up, it would have been the likes of Michael Collins. It would have been the likes of Dan Breen and Tom Barry. And I remember reading a book called The Irish Hunger Strike. Later, I would have read 10 Men Dead. And what that probably did to me was, it was looking at the personal stories of Bobby Sands, you know what I mean? And how the Northern state treated him and what it offered him. And then beyond that, even Francie Hughes. And I couldn't see any difference with these people. And as I said, the Dan Breens and Tom Barrys and those who are lauded in Ireland as heroes from the 1920s, I saw a continuity of struggle. Like at the same time, like I told you earlier, am I very glad that those circumstances have changed and that conflict is not an option into the future. And what we see is a means of bringing about a united Ireland and a better Ireland for everybody through democratic and peaceful means. But they would have been something that would have triggered me as as a kid, I would have always had an interest in politics. I remember in Dundalk when Mairead Farrell, Sean Savage, and Dan McCann were killed in Gibraltar by the SAS, I believe on the orders of Margaret Thatcher. I remember the bodies coming through Dundalk. I remember the streets being lined. That things like that would have had a major impact on me. And I would have looked up to a number of Republican leaders over the years and the particular roles they played. But as I say, none less than Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, and particularly the role they played in delivering the peace process. And hopefully that peace process brings us a means of, ending what has been an unhappy relationship with Britain, and that, like, Irish national freedom and our ability then to operate in the world. And then at that stage, you know what I mean, your relationships will be a lot better with all your neighbours, because and we all know we're a very interconnected world. So that piece is absolutely vital.
I think we're up to our second last question. So, what made you run in the 2020 Irish election, Rui? And what made you join Sinn Fein?
Well, look, I've been Sinn Féin member for a million years, and even
Back
back
to the
to
dinosaurs.
yeah. Well, no, as a kid, I got a visitor's pass to the Sinn Féin Irish in 1995. Look, Sinn Féin is the only party that I have ever supported, as I say, long before I could even vote. I think I've already stated that, I saw myself as an Irish Republican. I saw that these were the only people, this was the only party, this was the only movement that was engaged in trying to bring about a united Ireland, you know what I mean, on seeing right on the Republic as declared in 1916 by Patrick Pearse. So there wasn't a whole pile of choice in relation to anybody else from my point of view. And again, I would have worked for Sinn Féin at many levels over many years. And I'll tell you what it was. It was Kevin Meenan, who would have been my local councillor here in this area. He literally, at the time, had a health scare, and he decided he was going to resign at that stage. So I decided I would take up on this. I would just say to hell with it, and maybe, you know what I mean. I can be more useful doing this than what I was doing previously. So I got co-opted in there. Lucky enough that the party supported me in relation to that. And I was on the council September 18, 2017, and the government then nearly fell. Gerry Adams was standing down, and I said, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, you know what I mean? So said I'll put my name forward, and I was lucky enough to be selected. Now, that government managed to survive for a considerable amount longer, and the election then happened in February 2020. And I actually stood in the 2019 election as a councillor, so was elected in my own right, and it wasn't a particularly great election for us across the board. But look, obviously, it's a great privilege to be elected by people, and it's a great privilege to be supported by those around you. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And see, for all you could give out about social media and the madness, and I think there are particular issues that need to be dealt with, and I think the social media companies to be held to account. Like, they're literally only interested in making money. They have optimized algorithms, and they're not necessarily beneficial in relation to democracy. Anyone can get on and say anything, and utterly misinformation.
And no matter what side you're on, it's just
no, exactly. And it is something that does need to be addressed. You know what I mean? And here it's internationally. It's the European Commission has to play a part. Every individual government has to, but there has to be agreement, because, and it's not a particularly healthy place for an awful lot of people, I would say, themselves.
Exactly.
And the more than what I'm talking about, and I'm going to just deviate. An issue I also would be in relation to mental health services and those supports that are needed. You know what I mean? And I know at times there can be a crossover with addiction services and all the rest of it. Right? As I say, I tangent on my tangent. So look, I had a whole pile of choice in saying Sinn Féin as being the best vehicle in relation to delivering Irish unity, and also into delivering something better for those communities that have been forgot about. Okay, and like I also said, I believe that I could play a part in doing this, and I believe at times we've had, and would have to, I'd also have to thanks, you know what I mean, not only, as I say, what I should have said about Kevin is after I was co-opted in, Kevin luckily had a reprieve in relation to the health scare. You know what I
That's
mean?
good.
So no, he actually when I was elected as TD, he was co-opted back into my council seat. You know what I mean? Now Kevin's been a councillor since 1999, so you know what I mean. It's
So it was a full 360 basically. You replaced him
exactly,
at that point,
exactly,
and then
and I
he
used
took your
to,
spot.
yeah, and I used to say people think we actually did, set this up, but we didn't. It's just the way the
Mm,
circumstances arose, And we had a council election there, and we went in with seven. We still have seven. And fair play to the people who stood for us. I think we may have made mistakes around that, and we probably could have had a slightly better election. But our percentages are not where we would like them to be as they had been previously. But like I told you, the thing about a political party is, and we're a sufficiently big political party that we can put a message out there. We need to sell to people. Here's what we would offer in government. We believe we can deliver this in government, and we need you to support us in relation to doing it. And that's it. Those that will. Those that don't. That's democracy. And what
exactly.
happens afterwards then is, government will be formed on the basis of those who have the number to do it now. And hopefully, we put ourselves in a position that we can be a major player in relation to whatever and to deliver a program of government that benefits the people and moves on the issue as regards Irish unity also. So yeah, no, that's it. I couldn't see myself being in any other party. Like I said, it's the
Not
history
even
of
the other Irish Republican Party, Fianna Fáil. Not even them at
well,
all.
we would state it. I'm not sure I accept them as being. I accept there are people who are involved with Fianna Fáil who see themselves as Republicans and whatever else. Now, and people would say we all have our own view in relation to history, and to a degree, history you have to remember where you came from and all the rest of it, but you also then have to deal with the situation you find yourself in now. And we will work like we do not own the this the, we do not own the question of Irish unity. We need everybody to be engaged in relation to that. And whatever we may disagree in relation to what has happened in the past, or even how we do this, we need to work together on those bits we can to actually deliver something that is a lot better. So um I couldn't have seen myself being a member of any other political party. I saw that that Sinn Fein, played a major role.
Mm,
Was the only party that was engaged in Republican struggle about national liberation, and again on a localized level, that it worked incredibly hard and engaged with communities that
mm.
the rest of politics had forgotten about. And from time to time, as I say, we've had individual successes, whether I'm talking about myself, whether I'm talking about the councillors that we have, whether I'm talking about the likes of Anne and Kathleen who work in my office and do a huge level of work, and all those other activists, you know what I mean? But I think we have potential for a lot more. And, I would even put it forward in relation to myself. I obviously have a greater level of experience. You will always get caught on the reactivity of dealing with multiple issues in politics, and that's part of it that makes it interesting. But I suppose it's that idea that you need to also then say, here are some top line issues that we need to make sure we move
Exactly.
these, whether that's whether that's in government or out of government. And so that's something that would be absolutely vital to myself.
I totally agree with you there, Rui. So moving on then to our final question. I know you've nearly spent 90 minutes with this, Rui, so hopefully it's been very enjoyable. But finally, our final question to you is, what would you say, what would be some advice you'd give to students actually, in 2024, especially those I know in Ireland that would be starting university or high school this year?
Oh, well, look here, that's straightforward. Don't do anything like I did when I was a student. No, look, the, sometimes you can be crazy. You think you either have to be, as a student, that you're an absolutely spectacular, you don't miss anything, you go to everything, you're then studying 12 hours and, you're involved in, every extracurricular thing, particularly those things that relate specifically to your course. But I'm not sure on that. What I would say is you need here, it's attend, it's enjoy, it's make sure you stay in the game. You know what I mean? What I often found afterwards, if you had just done not quite the minimum, but if you had gone to all your lectures, if you had done the
Exactly.
assignments, your life would have been a hell of a lot easier, a lot more enjoyable, and you can still do those other pieces that you enjoy, whether that's extracurricular in sport or interests, and possibly even stuff that relates to the particular course you're doing. And again, you will never have the time, energy, and lack of responsibilities that you have at that time in your life. So
Mm,
use it wisely, because the time will pass. Time will
exactly.
definitely
You
pass.
never get you
You
never get back your youth at the
And
end of
I'm
the
quite right down here. Make sure that your regrets are, are minimal. There's nobody who lives an absolutely perfect life. And
exactly.
hopefully,
And at the end of the day, as a lot of politicians have said to us on the podcast, take every opportunity as it is, and because you never know exactly what's gonna happen next, and if that
oh no,
opportunity were
you can have all the plans you want. And what's that idea? People plan and God laughs, or everyone has a plan and then I hit you in the mouth, or whatever Mike Tyson
Mm,
said that time. So that's the way you have to see the world.
exactly,
But yeah, and roll with it as best you can. Roll with it as best you can. And again, you will get no greater enjoyment. You will get no greater fulfillment than engaging with your own community, engaging with people and helping them, whatever that is.
mm,
And
exactly,
that's something
exactly,
sometimes that we lack. You know what I mean?
exactly.
It's
A
that
lot of young
element
people
of,
just
yeah,
community
no, that's
connection.
it. Yeah, but what they will discover, yeah, connectivity, whatever, and whether that's with clubs, organizations, whatever else, it's utterly beneficial. And then it's not always a case of what I can get out of something; it's what I can do for it, and in that we all benefit, and no one more than
Exactly.
yourself.
Exactly. 100% agree with you, Rui. So those are
And
all
I,
our
and I,
questions then. Yeah, sorry.
and that's it.
You're fine.
And I suppose, no, no, no. Here, yeah, like, be as kind as you can. I suppose in relation to your friends, and particularly those that, because you will always have a couple who will support you in all sets of circumstances and all the rest of it.
Mm,
And it goes without saying, like, as a politician, you wouldn't survive without your friends. But beyond that, within the political organization, your comrades, and then here, and my family. And I should make mention of my wife Anne Marie, because she states I never make mention in any way, shape, or form.
Hopefully she
So
watches this back and hope she's watches this back and she's in with it and she's still listening and paying attention an hour and 30 minutes in and she
yeah, no,
recognizes
no.
your
So look, in fairness, Anne Marie and all the kids, not that they're actually kids anymore to any shape or form, but yeah, no, look, it's great, and in fairness, you get in a hell of a lot of freedom on the basis that you're given supports above and beyond. And I'm sure there's a lot of people, if they realize, you know what I mean,
mm,
just what sort of effort that they put in, and particularly Anne Marie puts in, that allows me the time to do these other things. And there's probably
exactly.
people would say that, yeah, yeah, we would give out to her. What are you letting that fill away with all that for? But
Mm,
the fact is, in fairness, I suppose it's how a team works from a point of view. Then that I get an opportunity to do things that hopefully benefit the constituents and the people of Loudon beyond. And then beyond that, if pushing forward Sinn Fein from a point of view of, which is the wider idea of us getting into government to deliver
exactly.
not only on Republican objectives, but also to deliver a better life for everybody that's out there.
Exactly, exactly. So those are all our questions then for you, Rory. I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast and spending 90 minutes with us and hearing your stories. Um, before Parliament, working in council and working as a community organizer, and then time in Parliament and your some advice you give to students in 2024. So I'm sure our viewers will really appreciate our third Irish politician, but our first Sinn Fein TD to come on the podcast and speak to us.
Well, look here, I really enjoyed it. Hopefully, I didn't get myself in too much trouble. Yeah,
Did you
now,
let
and
did
I'm
you
sure.
let our leadership know that you're going to hop on?
No, no, and usually I would run stuff past the press office. I have to say, in this case, I might not have. I might have forgotten to do it. You know what I mean? So I will probably do that retrospectively now, straight away after I leave. As I run to an
Great.
event, I'll give them a ring.
Mm,
Look, in fairness, I don't think anyone would have any issue in relation to this. I think the questions were fair. And look, if anyone can get any benefit out of it, and once people, now I imagine some people will complain. I'm told I'm very fidgety. You know what I mean? And from time to time, I suppose you had cups, you had pens, your hands being raised, and all the rest of it. So
It's
it's
more
not like
interactive in
I
that
would.
sense, moving things around, not being so static and still.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I can be very static and still, But look, I appreciate it. It was good fun,
Yeah. All right.
I
Thank you
now
again,
behind
Rory.
for the rest of the day, so I'll have to.
Yes,
But like as I said before, the art of being a politician is doing a lot of things, and unfortunately, doing
exactly.
most of them badly, and an occasional one to an okay degree.
Exactly. It's all about getting things done in such a short period of time. That you're basically at three events at once at one point. So, you gotta make sure running in between things and that sort of thing. So we do really appreciate, all politicians' efforts, in going around to community events and representing the people.